Hello everyone and welcome to the Dakota Interviews at Bismarck State College. I'm Clay Jenkinson, the director of the Dakota Interviews Project. 100 interviews of interesting North Dakotans from all over the state and all walks of life. And today I'm delighted to welcome into the BSC studio Margaret Sitte, who is a former North Dakota state legislator and activist. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Clay.
So let me start the hardest possible way. As we record this, the state legislature is in session. Every 2 years, they meet for about 90 days. And you were hoping that you were going to be sitting in the state legislature, and you're not. How does that feel?
Number one, I'm so grateful that the people of my district voted me there, that I was able to serve 4 years in the House and 4 years in the Senate. Of course, it's bittersweet. Of course, I would love to be there. Politics runs in my veins. My father used to say, there are only two things worth talking about in life, religion and politics.
Really?
And he said, even though polite society tells you you can't talk about them, that's what you need to talk about.
There was a certain level of anger, bitterness, passion in this that normally we don't see. And you had to be upset by that.
I wasn't upset by it, but I have to say that the hatred was tangible. The vitriol was so explicit that it shocked me, because I didn't get nasty. I refuse to be nasty. Life is too short to be nasty. And yet the campaign was so very bitter and so full of untruths, misstatements, false accusations, that I really was naive. I really didn't believe that people would believe that awful stuff, and they did. And so what can you do but just go on from it? I took a vacation right afterwards. The next day I left to baptize a new granddaughter. What great joy. And then, left on a few different trips for those next 2 months. I just needed to get out of town. And so I've let it go. People who hold bitterness in their hearts and hatred in their hearts will have their own punishment because they bring it upon themselves. And people who forgive and move on have joy.
Why such vitriol?
I had the courage to take on the issue of life. And I just assumed that other people would see the importance of protecting life as being one of the fundamental rights of our country. And I was mistaken. 40 years of abortion in this country have colored many people. We all know people who have experienced abortions. And the people who have shared their abortion experiences with me have experienced the severe heartache, the pain, the anguish. And yet I have come to understand that there are other people who don't see it that way, who really have bought into an entirely different culture. And it really was a sea change that occurred, and I guess I just didn't see that.
So I'm going to back up here in a moment, but when did you realize you were going to lose?
I kept up hope to the very end. I'm a hopeful person. I'm a joyful person. I kept knocking on those doors. I made it to every door. I actually finished about 10 days early, which is the earliest I've ever finished. I had a lot of hope. People were very good and very open, and maybe I peaked too early. I've thought that afterwards, because I think that this social media and all of that really peaked in those last 10 days, and I wasn't out walking anymore. I was doing other things.
But, so you didn't know until the day of the election?
That's right. I didn't know that. I walked into that room very hopeful.
And when you discovered that you had lost, did you cry?
I didn't cry right away. No, I was just fine. I would say I cried the hardest when I went back to caucus. My dear fellow senators, Republican senators, invited me back when they came to elect their new majority leader, and I get teary even thinking about it. I thank them. When you're in the legislature, excuse me.
No, take your time.
You're like brothers and sisters. You have 1,000 issues that come before you within 80 days. And you and I could agree and be best friends on one issue, and we could be polar opposites on the next, and yet we have to get along. And that forges bonds of intense friendship with Republicans and Democrats alike. I mean, when people say, oh, don't be so partisan, oh my goodness, we're not at all during the session. There are some things when a majority leader or a minority leader will want to make a certain point depending on the personality of that leader at the time. That is so rare. That's less than 5%, maybe less than 3% of the time. The rest of the time, we're working together. I always tried to get a Democrat on every bill I sponsored, and I was on many Democrats' bills.
Let's walk quickly through the pro-life world here. Babies are born mostly through sexual intercourse. How do you feel about widespread availability of birth control?
That's a reality of our culture. I'm not objecting to birth control. I do object to the government providing it free of charge when these young people don't realize the long-term consequences of what they're doing to themselves psychologically, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. And I think that is a great sadness. Whatever government subsidizes, we get more of.
So then let's say that a person becomes pregnant. For whatever reason, it's an unexpected and unwanted pregnancy. Take it from there. Now what? In your view, what options should this couple or this woman have?
I think we've all known many people who have been born who were unexpected and perhaps at the beginning of the pregnancy unwanted. As a high school teacher, and especially that since I was elected, I've been subbing all over in the public schools, and I would sub in the tutoring lab with the kids who are at risk of dropping out. I've seen the troubled side of teenage life, and especially in this century. It's very different than when I grew up. It's so sad to see kids getting kicked out of their homes, but we do have many, many resources there to help them. And I think so often what happens is we have a failure of society to support those who are in trouble. And we need to step up to the plate.
So under what circumstances would you support the termination of a pregnancy?
I don't support the termination of a pregnancy. That is a human life.
Period. And in case of rape?
Rape is a terrible, violent crime. It has to be prosecuted, and it is prosecuted to the extent of murder. It absolutely is the worst violation I can ever imagine. And when I think of the terrible situations that are happening out there, especially, I think, when we're reading this whole series that's in the Tribune these days about trafficking and what's happening to women, it absolutely makes me so angry. I can't imagine any lower place in hell than for someone who would abuse a woman or a child. That being said, I do think of several women that I've heard speak. One being Pam Stenzel from Minneapolis, who said that she was the product of rape. And she said when people talk about a rape incest exception, they may as well look me in the eye and say, you have no right to be here. She said, my mother was raped when I was 16. When she was 16, she gave me up for adoption. And she said, I've had a wonderful life, and I'm so glad that I was adopted. My brother and sister-in-law have 2 adopted children. There are so many people who would love to adopt children and can't because there aren't enough babies available. And so as awful as it is, as awful as rape is, I think to do violence twice to violate that woman a second time would just be so terrible. I had a baby born 2 months premature, and so she was in ICU for 17 days. That was another experience that really shaped my strong pro-life views, because when you're there and you're watching babies die on a daily basis, not all of them make it out of neonatal ICU, and you're praying for that mother next to you as she's losing that child, you realize how important every life is.
So, just to summarize, you are against an exception for rape and incest.
I
you
am.
are. You said, okay.
I am.
And I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just here to understand.
Right.
And in the case of severe health threat to the mother's life.
Oh my goodness! That's always understood. Absolutely.
So that if the woman's life is in jeopardy,
absolutely.
then
That's
you
absolutely,
would not,
because what would be the use of having the woman die if
right.
the child is if the woman's going to die, then the baby's not going to make it. So absolutely, you treat the life and health of the mother. Absolutely. Huh?
Do you think, Margaret, that if you were not as outspoken about this as everyone knows you are, that you would have been reelected in November?
Absolutely.
Do you?
Oh, I do. I do think so. You know, maybe not life. I mean, you know, I spoke up on marriage also. And so, you know, I mean, there are a few different issues, but, you know, I look at it this way. I always hated the word politician. I've never considered myself a politician. I like the term stateswoman. Statesman, stateswoman. You know, I think if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And so, you know, if people like me and what I stand for, they'll vote for me. If they don't, that's okay.
In the aftermath, as you're talking this over with your closest friends and family and so on, trying to think, well, what went wrong? How do you analyze the relationship between your moral certainties and your election results?
You know, when you look at the wide swing, because I won by 1,000 votes, you know, 4 years ago,
Right.
and then lost by 1,000 votes now. And so, I mean, that's a wide swing of voters. And so I don't think that people really disagree with me that much on the life issue. I really do believe that the propaganda, I do believe that all of the different things that were said regarding IVF or, you know, wanting to take away Social Security, total hogwash, all of those things just ate away at people, eroded confidence. I do think that is the way that it was done.
So you
I don't think, I mean, as I said, if it were the life issue, I think I would have heard about it more when I was out knocking on doors.
You don't think that was it?
I don't think it was the prime issue. I don't, because it wasn't. If it was, why didn't my opponent say, I am pro-abortion, and this election is all about life? She didn't ever once say that. It was never brought up. It was always, not even in the debate, it was not brought up. So what does that tell you? It was all a campaign underground, and in so many other ways. You know, talking about, you know, my stands on, you know, the bullying bill or different things. And you know, I have a way of ticking off enough people.
Why do you do that?
I mean, I oppose Common Core.
Okay, let's go there. Let's leave
Okay.
reproduction. Here we are, and I'm just sort of swallowing hard and sighing because you know there's going to be, for the next 4 or 5 years, an intense national debate about the Common Core. It's going to become, I think, the culture war issue of our time, of this time. What's at stake here?
The heart and soul of our children is at stake here. As a lifelong, not lifelong teacher, I've done a lot of different things, but in essence, I consider myself a teacher because I love teaching. I love working with young people, teenagers, especially as a high school English teacher. And when you have a variety of young people, especially as they're getting ready to enter college, I taught senior English for a number of years. You have a wide disparity in abilities, and that is how it should be. The purpose of education is not just to make people college and career ready. The purpose of education is to educate citizens for this great nation, which is why we need a strong sense of history. And so when I look at the Common Core and I see how they're cutting out Mark Twain and Shakespeare and so many of my favorite authors, and they're saying that everyone is held to the same level, and even the word standard. When people say, oh, I'm all for standards, I'm not for standards. You know why? Because we are not machines. We should not be measured according to a standard. That is a total wrong way to look at an individual human being. We are each a treasured being put here on this earth for a short time, and we want each individual to be able to flourish, to be able to do the best with whatever talents God has given him or her. As a teacher, I want to be able to go into my classroom and open a wealth of literature and experiences and get that information communicated to my students the best way that I know how, the best way that my experience tells me to do it. To me, if I have a good textbook, because I realize that I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack. I can't create an entire curriculum on my own, so I want to find a book with a good scope and sequence. Not that I have to use every bit of it, but I want something to choose from, and then I can have other novels and things to pull from. But to keep every teacher on the same page, to tell teachers that they will be paid according to merit pay based on how well their students do on a test, and to have all this high stakes testing for children is absolutely going to lead to fraud and corruption, because we've seen that already happen in other states. It's too much pressure on the teachers, it's too much pressure on the students, and it defeats the real purpose of education, which is to love learning. I really believe, and I think it comes from Hayek in The Road to Serfdom, who said that every time we take a step away from freedom, from individual liberty, towards central planning, which is exactly what Common Core is, we move closer to dictatorship. We move closer to a totalitarian society. And, we have been blessed to be born in the freest nation. We have been the freest people in the history of the world. And why would we go down the road to serfdom? Why would we go down the road to central planning when we can have freedom and individuality? They've done study after study. Standards are not ever linked to higher student achievement. It's never been shown to work.
Margaret, this is kind of a really general question, but how did you become Margaret Sitte? Tell us a little bit about how you got to this point in your life.
Well, who knows how we get where we are, but my grandparents on both sides homesteaded.
Homesteaded?
Homesteaded.
Where?
My Norwegian grandparents came here in 1903 and homesteaded in McKenzie County by Schaefer and Keene in 1904. And then on the German side, my grandfather was born near Mankato. His father's homestead is now the Mankato Country Club.
And in Minnesota.
Yes, and then they homesteaded in the Red River Valley at Dumont for 3 years, where my dad was born, and were flooded out 3 years in a row. So they'd had it with that doggone Red River Valley. And they moved to the land of opportunity, Ray, North Dakota.
Ray.
With 5 siblings moved there. And so St. Michael's Church in Ray is named for my grandpa Mike.
Really?
Oh, yes. I mean, and 3 other Mikes. There were 4 Mikes total who helped found that church. But there's actually, of course, named for St. Michael the Archangel. But anyway, and so, my parents had this courage. Let me go back and tell one story about my grandmother on the Norwegian side. I used to ask my mother, who was born in 1907 in Shanty, on the prairie, and so her older siblings had been born in Norway. I said, well, how was it growing up in the prairie? I said, weren't you afraid of the Indians? Because when in the 50s, we all played cowboys and Indians. Oh, no, she said, we were afraid of the cowboys. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, I'll never forget, one day, a group of horsemen came riding across the prairie, and Grandpa had gone to town. And she said, Grandma ran in the house and got the shotgun, and she lined us 4 kids up behind her, and she stood there and faced them as they rode into the yard. And
What did they want?
well, they were trying to drive the homesteaders out.
Right, this was
Yeah.
the open range versus
Exactly,
the nesters.
exactly. And so she just stood her ground, and she just let them know, and they didn't bother at all then, you know. I think it was probably that they felt shamed that a woman had to stand there with a gun and protect her 4 little children. And so
And where was this homestead?
north of Watford City, 14 miles northeast of Watford City. Anyway, so my parents were older when they got married. My mother was 38, almost 39, and my dad 44, just a month or 2 shy of 45.
And this was where?
They got married here in Bismarck.
In Bismarck.
Uh-huh. They had both been one-room country school teachers, and then Dad was an engineer, got his degree at UND, and he was born in 1901, so he was a year too young for World War I, and he was too old to go and fight in World War II. And so he went to Detroit and designed armored vehicles, tanks and things for the war effort, and then later worked in Chicago as an engineer, and then came back, and he never really liked his engineering. He always wanted to be a veterinarian, and his father said there's no money in that, because they were dairy farmers. And so he was a Hudson Packard car dealer. But my mother had been an accountant at the Bank of North Dakota, and they met at a legislative third house dance in 1945, and were married in 46.
They met at a legislative dance.
Yes, because my mother had, when the legislature came to town, there weren't enough people to work at the legislature, so an accountant at the Bank of North Dakota would give up her job temporarily to go work and be a clerk at the legislature.
And
that's
they
what
met there.
that's where my parents met.
So in a way, it's in the family structure.
Exactly right. My dad was an engineer at the Public Service Commission at the time. I had an idyllic childhood. I grew up on Avenue B between Cathedral School and Roosevelt.
Okay.
And there were 21 children in that block in the 1950s growing up together. Families had 8 and 9 children. I only had one brother because my parents were older when they were married, and they only had the 2 of us. And so, but we just, there was a game of tag going on. There was something going on all the time. It was just such a wonderful time to grow up and feel safe. And, and I had this wonderful family. I always say I had a father who was a German Catholic and who loved the rosary, and a mother who was a Norwegian Lutheran who became Catholic, but who loved to pray, to read the Bible. And so I had the best of both worlds.
This could have been, my mother's a teacher, this could have been a sort of a typical Midwestern life. You teach, then you get married, maybe you don't teach while you're having your children, you have 4 children. At some point, that wasn't enough for you. You wanted to be a public servant. You wanted to, in some sense, help to shape the political culture of North Dakota. How did that happen?
It really happened again through books. So all through the 80s, we had our 4 children all in the 80s, from January 5th of 1980 through 87. And it was a New Year's resolution on January 1st of 1990 to start reading a book a month to educate myself.
A book a month?
A book a month. Because I really hadn't had time to read.
Of course.
You're just so busy, you get caught up in different things, and I would read snippets, and I felt like I was letting my mind turn to mush, and I couldn't stand it. And then my father died in 81, and so I absorbed his library. And so, we have bookcases and bookcases of books. We are avid readers in our house. And so I just started, to read, and I don't know if it's a book a month, but I'm still a prolific reader, and I just love to plunge into books. I have to stop myself from plunging into books. And so anyway, as I started to educate myself, it's amazing how doors open. And then the Bismarck Tribune announced in 1993 August 15th of 93, that they were going to have an editorial page columnist contest, and people could submit 3 sample columns, which I did, and I won.
You became a Bismarck Tribune columnist.
I did.
In an open competition.
That's right. And so I had to keep reading. And I was so thankful for what I had been reading the 3 previous years, because that gave me a lot of stock, you know, and I was full of ideas. I mean, books give us ideas, right? And so I was able to share a lot of my reading. And, you know, I was the most popular columnist in the Tribune.
How long did you do that?
I did that until 99.
So about 6 years.
Yes.
And what sorts of things did you write about?
Oh, I wrote a lot about education because my kids were in school at the time, and so I cared deeply about education, and I could see that they weren't being challenged as adequately as I wanted them to be challenged. I'll never forget, I was critical of Kent Conrad in one of my first columns. I think I gave him a grade of a C.
Oh my.
I said if he were, you know, if we were going to grade our senators, he would rank no better than a C or something. And he just tore into me. He just wrote this
he wrote
on the editorial page. Just this awful, you know, how dare she, you know, who is she to, you know, criticize me and all of this, you know. And I just sort of looked up at the Lord and said, who am I to do this, Lord? I'm a little nothing. You know, why did you pick me to write this column, you know? And not that I got a clear response, but just that, you know, if whatever you do with the best that you can do it. And the Lord equips you with the courage to do what you think is right. And so it just forced me to have a deeper prayer life. I started going to daily mass.
Wait a minute, now explain that. So you are a mother and you are a homemaker and you teach at times, and you're married, and suddenly in an open competition you become a columnist for the Bismarck Tribune. And in the course of this now suddenly you are bringing up your conversations with God. So how does this connect?
Oh, well, because I think whenever you're in a severe trial, whenever you're really tested, and, you know, and Kent Conrad's, you know, very strong condemning of my words, made me just come to grips with myself and think, well, do I not have a place here, or do I have a place here? And so I turned to the Lord in prayer, and I found out, yes, I do have a place here. I do have a right to say these things. They're important words that need to be said. And so it just helped me get the courage that I needed.
But then that prayer dialogue continued.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, in a way, have you ever told
Mass.
Kent this?
No.
How about, you know,
No.
he might be gratified to know that he helped to precipitate. There was a crisis here, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Who am I?
Yeah,
And here's someone of enormous power telling me to shut up, basically.
Exactly.
So let's go through this quickly. Give me a little Margaret Sitte political profile, big government, little government, you know, that sort of thing. How do you see the world?
Oh, I believe in the principle of subsidiarity, that government governs best, that governs least, and that governs best at the local level.
Very Thomas Jefferson, yes.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. What else?
Okay, I guess I would believe in less regulation. You know, I was always trying, when I was a legislator, I always tried to figure out how can we cut the regulations on people, because as a small business owner, when my dad died in '81, I wound up being a partner in Buy Rate Grocery. And so, you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act was coming through, and we had to change our doorways and all these different things. I know what impact those government regulations have on small businesses, and it's devastating. It is so costly. And so, you know, I've always been opposing government regulation, or, you know, less government regulation. Lower taxes. I believe that you can spend your money better than the government can spend it. I had a man when I was out walking, and I thought, oh boy, he sure understands me. He said, why can't you cut my taxes so I can have the money to remodel my kitchen? He said, then I might stay in Bismarck and retire here. Because he said, right now with the way property taxes are going, he said, I'm going to move out of this place. I was always going to stay in Bismarck my whole life, but I'm not anymore. And so it's absolutely that basic. Cut taxes, let people spend more of their own money. They will stimulate the economy, and let things take care of themselves. The free enterprise system works. Individual responsibility. Teach a person to fish. If they need help giving them a fish for a while, get involved in your local charities. Serve on the Salvation Army board for a while. Help out at a soup kitchen. Do something practical to get out there and see what it's like for poor people who are really struggling. Identify with the young mothers who are having to leave the reservations with their children because the meth epidemic is too terrible. And, and help them to get situated for a time. But then don't keep them on the dole forever. Don't keep people down. And, it's interesting. I would identify with the Democrats often when it would come to peace proposals. I'm not an interventionist around the world, and that isn't a legislative issue, but I want us to keep our troops at home. I don't want us out there fighting all these little skirmishes all over. We have no business being out there, and we're getting all this blowback because of it, and it is very troubling. I think if you study the rise of ISIS, where does it come from? It comes from all these people being held up together in some of these containment places when the Americans first arrived over there. And then the last point is just prosperity. If we just roll back government, if we allow the free enterprise system to work, you're a lover of Thomas Paine and early writings and de Tocqueville, and we know about the glory days of this country. And we want that freedom to be here for our children and grandchildren. And yet we know, as Ben Franklin said, what kind of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin? A republic, if you can keep it. Because as soon as people learn that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury, the days are numbered. People talk about, what can I have? What can, and if that's what they want from government, then I don't want to serve. Because I don't want to be one who gives largesse from the public treasury. I want to roll back those high taxes. Yes, we need to invest in infrastructure. Yes, government has certain clearly defined roles that are very important, but we should not be building huge bureaucracies that really don't help the people. We want government to protect our life, our liberty, and our property. And other than that, we want to be left alone. That's the essence of freedom. And that's, I think, what we are losing.
How deep is your concern about where this country is headed?
Oh, I have very deep concerns. I'm very upset about the Cromnibus. I contacted my representative yesterday, Representative Kramer, and said, please don't vote for Boehner again. I'm tired of the status quo. I think it's extremely important that we start to roll back this size of government. Look at the debt that we have heaped up for our grandchildren and our children to pay off. That is so immoral. It is so wrong for us, the baby boom generation, who've had it the best of anyone, to lay up burdens that are too heavy to carry and put them on our children's backs. It is just so terrible. If I were elected to Congress, I would work to cut the size of our government by 10% the first year I'm there, and I would keep cutting it to 10% to 10% until we could, and I don't know if we could do it every year, but maybe every other year at first. But you know what? Anyone can cut back 10%, And anyway, keep cutting until we can live within our means. At the state legislature, we live within our means. My first session, we finished with, I think, $11 million, projected income, and the state was spending $10 million a day. We had like a day and a smidgen and an hour of cash reserves left. That's how tight it was in '03. Those of us who have had to balance tight budgets understand that you can live within your means, because if you really care about something, you set your priorities accordingly. If we really care about the future of this country, we will balance the budget. We will set things right for our children and grandchildren, and in the course of doing so, we will roll back this behemoth government that is too intrusive into our lives.
Mitt Romney sort of famously got himself in trouble by saying that about 47% of the American people have essentially become dependent, and they are taking more from their society than they are giving. How much of that do you think is true, that we're creating a very large dependency class?
Oh, I think that's very true. Let me give you an example. Tim Mathern, Senator Tim Mathern from Fargo, who most people would think is the absolute opposite of me on so many issues, but we're really good friends, talked to the Council on State Governments, which is quite a liberal think tank. And they have the council on, of like the governor's council, all these different groups. Anyway, and he asked them to come out here to North Dakota, and he handpicked about 15 legislators. I mean, he worked with them, about 15 government employees, and about 15 Native Americans, and asked us to take 3 days out of our lives, no pay, to discuss the plight of Native American children 0 to 3 on reservations in North Dakota. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago that we did this. It was so enlightening. And so we, the first day, we just talked about all of the statistics. Oh my goodness, if we just really look at the statistics, it breaks your heart. Suicide, drugs, imprisonment, lack of education, out of wedlock births, I mean, abuse, neglect, you name it. What's happening on our Indian reservations in North Dakota is absolutely so sad. It breaks your heart. You think of those children growing up in this situation. And I think of my own mother, who served on a grand jury when I was 14. And the case was of a 14-year-old girl who was on an Indian reservation and had been raped. And she was, the accuser was being prosecuted. And her mother was put on the stand. And they said, "Does this happen often on your reservation?" And her mother said, "There's not a girl who makes it to 14 untouched on our reservation."
She said that?
She said that. My mother came home, sat on the edge of my bed with me that night, and gave me a big hug and said, "I want you to know, don't ever judge another woman, because you don't know what she's had to endure." And then she and my father set about to become foster parents, because they wanted to become foster parents for a Native American child, but they were told they were too old.
Too old at this point.
Too old, so they couldn't do it. Thank you so much. Anyway, so we had 3 days. One day,
just looking at the situation.
At the situation. The second day, we went down to Standing Rock, and we had tours of various facilities and things. And so I've been at Standing Rock a lot because my kids played sports down at Standing Rock, and so we would go down there all the time for games. And then the third day, we summarized. We looked at all of the different programs available, and that's when the state employees really helped. We found out that there were 42 separate federal funding streams of money coming in through the state capitol and being funneled out to the reservations just to deal with children 0 to 3. There was Head Start, there was Early Head Start, there was Healthy Start, there was Early Healthy Start. I mean, on and on and on. You can come up with all these names of programs that you can imagine. And we legislators sat there with our jaws dropping open wider and wider and wider as all of these state employees from Department of Human Services and Health listed all of these different programs. And the lady who came from DC, from the Council of State Governments, said, "I'm going to challenge you. Tear down those silos, block grant that money, and get it out there to do some good." And that is the truth of it. You know what we found out afterwards in follow-up dialogue? The state employees told us there were not just 42 separate federal funding streams, there were 72. 72 separate programs aimed at the plight of Native American children 0 to 3, and not one of them actually helping the children. You talk about what does government dependency do to people? It destroys them. It destroys them, and all we have to do is look at what has happened to our proud Native Americans who are living on reservations and who live in such terrible turmoil. And I want to help them be free of it.
How can we fix
I would love
this?
to give them portability of benefits. I've said this for years. Give people portability of benefits for 5 years to help them get off the reservation. And if they want to get an education or whatever and get back there, it's fine.
So let's move on here to a couple of other things. I'm interested in bullying. Of course, you had a role in this. So explain this issue, where you are, and what happened.
Well, we had this state law that was, being proposed about, anti-bullying, that every school has to have an anti-bullying policy and it has to be approved by the state. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is so ridiculous. I mean, bullying is real. It's terrible. And yet, schoolyard squabbles are not the place of the state. They should be, again, left to the local level. This is an issue of human nature. And so for us to have all of these grandiose policies in place, it absolutely escalates the situation. They have done studies, research has shown that when you identify someone as a bully and he is then, shamed through some of these policies, that those kids actually go on to commit suicide at a rate far higher than anyone else. Some of these kids are just testing their boundaries. And yes, they need to be severely disciplined at the time for whatever they have done, and whether that's going to be a detention and maybe even sent home for a couple days or whatever. They have to understand, and then, of course, apologize. But that is something that a local teacher and a local administrator should be working on.
So let's talk about North Dakota. How well are we doing? Nationally, you're a little disappointed. How well is North Dakota doing here?
Oh, North Dakota is the best place in the world
Why?
to live.
Why?
I mean, look at our economy. Look at everything going for us. So, and thank heavens that the Lord looked down on this little piece of prairie and decided to bless us with oil. I think North Dakota has so many strengths, our citizen legislature being one of them. I'm so glad that we don't have a full-time legislature. I'm so glad that we only meet 80 days every other year. I think it gives us more of a long-term perspective. It's very difficult to plan right now with the price of oil. I don't envy them this session. It's going to be very tough because, yes, we want to get 60% of all that extraction tax out there to those cities and counties and, get that infrastructure rolling as quickly as we can. But if that extraction tax is going to be going away, that's 6.5%, because we didn't address, what would happen if the price of oil would plummet, it can be really tough. But by and large, we just have such common sense legislators. We have people who rise up for a time and, do their best, serve their state, and then go back home. I mean, and to me, that is terrific. And so, I don't begrudge anyone, running for office and getting elected and see if the people are happy with that person or not.
I want you to really dig in on this one, Margaret, because you are not just someone saying, let the good times roll. You also represent that historic character in North Dakota.
Absolutely.
Homesteading, one-room schools, decency, safety.
Absolutely.
And now those things are in jeopardy in a big way. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, growing pains. But it's more than growing pains.
Yes,
What do you
is.
think happens to the long-term character of this, our beloved state, as we move into this much different economy?
Well, I saw it when I was out there knocking door to door. There are parts of town where I really did not feel as safe as I used
Bismarck,
to
you mean,
4 years ago.
your own district.
Absolutely. Central Bismarck. Very, very different people than lived here 4 years ago. But that is because the people who are coming here are primarily just the workers. They're not bringing their families. And so when we were out in the oil patch, and Brent Sanford, the mayor of Watford City, made this explicitly clear, we need the infrastructure to put in the sewer and water, which I agree with. The state needs to help them do that, even though the rest of us pay for our own sewer and water, because we need to create an environment where people can bring their families. We cannot just be the gold rush days. We cannot just have 20-to-1 men over women and think we're going to have a civil society. Women are the civilizers of a culture. We all know this. And so we need to have people bring their families and put down roots here. And in that regard, actually, this whole drop in the oil prices might turn out to be a benefit because it might slow everything down enough that, we're still doing a little bit of drilling, but the drilling rigs are tumbling. We see down 30 or 40, they're saying, and probably dropping some more. And so those crews will have steady work. The oil that's coming out of the ground is going to continue to flow. We're going to need those truck drivers and things. But hopefully people will start to see, okay, this job, we've had this drop, we've had this bump, and the jobs, it's not a complete bust. The jobs are not completely going away. I can have the confidence. I can bring my family here. I want to work here for 10, 15 years. I can see a future here. That's what we need to transition toward. Instead of just being a destination for a lot of money and then go back home.
My mother, for example, never locked her house until now, in Dickinson. She regards that as a significant loss of quality of life. Mm-hmm. I feel like you would be concerned about that. If we cease to be North Dakota and become just rich.
Oh, absolutely.
Then how do we keep North Dakota?
I have a relative who's on the school board in Ray. And of course, they were looking at maybe closing that school. And you know what happens to a town when the school closes? I mean, look at Ross. Look what happens. They completely blow away. And instead, they put a $6 million addition on that school. Yes, there are huge problems. For those teachers in those schools, it is not easy. But as I said, given the prospect of complete decline, Buffalo Commons, or oil activity, and dealing with crime and other things, I guess I'll take the oil activity and the growth and the positive energy going forward. But that doesn't mean that we are going to slack up on what we're doing with law enforcement or anything else, which is why the state committed a whole lot of resources to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, through the Attorney General, an increase in his budget, to new sheriffs, to, oh my goodness, we got a report on the Judiciary Committee. I think we paid for 80 new sheriffs' vehicles or something, as either the deputy sheriffs or the sheriffs themselves got new vehicles. And so, we have to just try to keep up with what's been going on.
How do we retain that unique North Dakota character that makes you cry when you talk about one-room schools and homesteading in the face of all the breathtaking changes that are occurring, not just in oil?
Well, we're not. Nothing stays the same, Clay. We can't keep that same level of emotion that I have for going forever. Times change, and so we have to move forward. But what we do need to keep are our core values, which means, our core values are our faith in God, our safety and security, our belief in the legacy of this land and in preserving this land and in keeping it unstained for future generations. And remembering that it's the ag economy that is the bread and butter of this state, always has been. It's what brought people here, and it will remain so. And so that's why we need to support infrastructure that will help everyone.
Assuming this doesn't bust, and I don't think anyone really thinks this can bust, so assuming that this is around for 50 or 100 years in some form, in 2064 or 2114, do you think North Dakota is a better place, in addition to being a wealthier place per capita, because of all of this?
I do think so.
In what ways do you think?
I really believe that if this growth does slow a bit, if we can get families to move here, and that was the trend that that I saw and that I was trying to push for when I was out on that oil can tour, is let's do everything we can to help build the infrastructure to get more people who will put down roots here and stay, and that's the key to real growth.
In the last sessions that you were in, suddenly the state is prosperous and there's a sort of sense that you can't even spend it. What was it like to have that sense that we can do things?
Well, I'm by nature frugal, so it's kind of tough to push that button for a new law school and a new medical school all in the same year, But I guess we figured, well, we have it. We do want to keep a strong medical school. We do, we didn't. I don't think that we were spendthrift, but I guess if I were looking at it now, I would wish that maybe we would have picked one of those and put more money out into infrastructure, rather than putting all of that, forward the way we did. But yeah, I mean, it's wonderful to be able to build the things that we think are important to the people of North Dakota. But I think also it's wonderful to be able to cut their taxes. That was what I was always looking at, is how can we get more money in the hands of the people who are paying the taxes, and let them have the freedom to start more businesses, to do more what they want to do.
Do you think we're doing a good enough job in that way of reducing taxes?
No.
What would you do?
Well, I was on the bill the last 2 sessions to either eliminate the income tax or severely cut it. And so, I'm glad that we're looking at that. I know that people don't talk about income tax. They don't complain about income tax. They all complain about property tax. But as I told so many people at the door, we don't set property taxes at the state level. And so I think that the system that we have in place with the property tax buy down is a huge mistake that's going to come back to bite us. And I have been voting for it because I didn't have many other choices. But I would much rather have us eliminate a couple cents off the sales tax, which is, I think, the worst tax of all, hurts the poor families the most, and eliminate the income tax, because that's what the state has control over. And then if the property tax gets too high, and we all feel it, and we all hate to pay it, then let the taxpayers go back to the people who put that tax upon them, which are their local school boards, city commissions, county commissions, and get that conversation flowing.
Margaret, you talked about the sanctity of the landscape and our stewardship values, and of course there have been some significant spills and fires and derailments, and then there have been a lot of niggling little things. How well do you think we're doing?
I think we can always do better. We've seen a lot of rule changes as far as the pits go, that we're not allowing those open pits anymore, that everything is going to be dry. I think, we've had some real shocks. When those filter socks were found, I think we all just thought, oh my goodness, how can this happen in our state? And, I think the fines need to be severe for those infractions. And, I think when you look at overall, I think we're doing really very well. And, I'm glad to see us getting tougher and tougher every year. And I think we've had to do that. We were probably a little too trusting in the beginning. And so, it's important. I'm glad to see some of these things changing with the way that we're going to be transporting the oil by rail. It only makes sense that we take out some of the flammability and hold those, for transportation standards to a different level. And of course, I think pipelines are the key to getting the oil out of here.
Keystone,
of course. We need to get these pipelines flowing so that we can use the rail for the grain. Oh my goodness, to have this bountiful harvest locked up here, unable to get it out, is awful. So I don't want oil to be so supreme that it impacts agriculture. That would just be terrible.
You were really the representative or the exemplar of a certain point of view, and you fought hard and courageously and against a lot of criticism to do what you've done. Now that you're not there, that leaves a gap. Who steps in and then takes up that mantle in your absence, whether it's temporary or permanent?
Whoever wants to do it. I mean, there is no indispensable person. We are all here on a temporary basis. And so I am so grateful that I had the chance to serve for a time. And there will be other people that will pick up on the key issues that need to be discussed. And that was so encouraging when I went to that final caucus, because we talked about various bill drafts, and Senator Kelly Armstrong from Dickinson said, oh, and by the way, I got such and such bill draft from someone, and someone told me this, and and someone else talked about a different issue, and and so you see the young people and the new enthusiasm, and you just remember that, you know, freedom breathes anew in every human breast, and there will be someone else who will pick up these issues in so many ways, and who will fight for the little person, as I tried to do, and who will stand for justice and truth and beauty and goodness in this great state.
It takes courage to stand up to talk about things that sometimes people don't want to talk about. You've done it. Not necessarily somebody else will pick up that mantle, at least not in the short term.
Well, then that's how it will be. I mean, I'm at complete peace. I really am at peace. I don't know what the future holds, and I'm not afraid of the future. I am willing to do go wherever I feel called, to do whatever go through whatever door opens. I'm not concerned about it. I really am at peace. I gave that campaign my all. I worked so hard. My feet hurt for a month or two afterwards. You know, my life is I'm such a type A personality. When I taught, it was a 70-hour-a-week job. Everything that I do, when I was a legislator, it was a huge commitment. I was so serious about it. I tried to read every bill. I was sitting there on the floor. I was always just skimming ahead. I was always just working as hard as I could in every way. And I just look at it as the Lord saying, you need a little break. Don't have a heart attack here. Chill out a bit. And so, you know, for me, I really have peace because I feel I did all I could do.
And what happened to the 1 million gigantic signs?
I've kept them.
You have them? And they are generic.
I'm just saying I've kept them.
You've got them in a warehouse.
I've kept them.
That's pretty funny. So what was your proudest legislative achievement if you had to choose?
Oh my goodness. I don't think that as a legislative achievement anything. I always think of Brynhild Haugland's statement that it's amazing what you can get done around here if you don't care who gets the credit. And so it wasn't that there was one, you know, crowning piece of glory. I mean, certainly I'm happy that I was able to get some different bills passed. But by and large, it's the work that you do day in, day out. You know, on committee, on Judiciary Committee, looking at the justice system and trying to ensure that we will have liberty and justice for all in this state, that we won't have over-criminalization, that we won't have overreach, that addicts will get treatment, and that violent people will get locked up. And so, you know, just trying to discern so much about what is right and just, and then living that. That's the best part about being a legislator.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
This was a wonderful interview with Margaret Sitte, legislator in both branches of the North Dakota legislative system, and lover of the state of North Dakota, and not done yet with your remarkable career. So thanks for being a part of the Dakota Interviews. I'm Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you next time.